Good morning. One of the things that we come across in the news every now and then is the matter of counterfeit products. Counterfeit products are out there, and they can be deadly. I ran across an article in the 2014 USA Today, and it mentioned the 9 most counterfeited products, and the list somewhat surprised me. When I think of counterfeit products, I don't necessarily think of these things, but notice that in the U.S., products that are seized by law enforcement, optical media, labels, computers, footwear, these things only comprise about 2 to 3% in each category. Pharmaceuticals are a little bit more at 5%. But when it comes to the most counterfeited products that are seized by American law enforcement, interestingly enough, they're most in the area of handbags. Handbags, watches, and jewelry. I'm not a big consumer of those things, so so I was a little surprised about the top things that are seized. And you'll notice on the list you have consumer electronics that they only take about 8%, and apparel and accessories are only 7%. These things, handbags, watches, jewelry. We don't like being cheated by anyone, but counterfeit products can be deadly. For instance, automobile products, phony automobile products. These are airbags that are counterfeit, and they don't deploy, or either that they ignite unnecessarily. And then these are batteries that are not genuine; they're fake, and so they leak, or perhaps they're defective in some other ways. And then finally, another picture. This is probably the most deadly type of counterfeit of all, and that's pharmaceuticals. You take something that is really not the medicine that you need to take, and either they're not effective or they can be detrimental to your health in some way. The epistle that I want to look at today is 2 Timothy. And one of the things that, as you go through this short epistle, it's 4 chapters, but one of the things that he will bring up, that Paul brings up, is the matter of counterfeit faith. But before he deals with this whole matter of counterfeit faith, he first deals with the real thing. The real thing meaning genuine faith. And so if you have your Bibles with me, please turn to 2 Timothy chapter 1. And we'll be looking at some of the early verses. Another picture. This passage, or this epistle, is one of the last known. It's the last known that we have some 2,000 years later. The last known from Paul, and it's one of the last epistles where he writes to a close co-worker and protege. And we're only going to look at chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, the passage that we read. But in the Greek, just to let you know that this passage that we read is one long sentence. It's one long sentence. And, of course, the Bible translators, English Bible translators, have a tendency to break long sentences up so they're easier to handle or to understand. And this is one long sentence, and what Paul does, is he expresses gratitude to God. There's an expression of thanks to God. And yet, even though it's only one sentence and it's at the beginning of the epistle, this opening line actually contains hints of themes that he'll deal with in the chapters to come. He gives thanks for Timothy, and as we'll see in this sentence, he's grateful for Timothy's life And in particular, Paul singles out the character of faith that Timothy has. And one of the things that I want to underscore is this matter of Timothy's faith. He says that, and as I said, this is one long sentence, but just to jump to verse 5, one of the things that he says is, I have been reminded of your sincere faith. In some translations, that it'll be rendered genuine faith. But it's the whole idea of something that is genuine, real, or I like to use the word authentic. And one of the things that I want to bring up looking at this sentence is to make the point that in the course of Paul's sentence, what Paul says is, he says something about the authentic faith, the genuine faith that Timothy has. And he talks about authentic faith in general, alludes to it in general. And I think what he is saying in the sentence, one of the things that he says, is that authentic faith has integrity. I say this because we look at the first line. He says, I thank God whom I serve as my forefathers did, with a clear conscience. And by adding this phrase, I serve God with a clear conscience, he is saying something about the fact that now he is toward the end of his life. He's been imprisoned. He is slated for execution. And one of the things that he says as he's sitting there and writing this letter is that he I guess reflects at the end of his life, and he can say that he is free of conscious guilt, that he serves with this clean conscience. And one of the things I want to explain is this matter of a conscience. One of the things that we sometimes don't realize is that this conscience that we talk about, we'll talk about, my conscience is clear, my conscience doesn't bother me. Conscience is that faculty, or is that aspect of our heart that tells us about right and wrong. Okay, it tells us that if we have a guilty conscience, that means that we have an inner voice that tells us that we've done something wrong. And Paul is saying that he serves with a clean conscience, or sometimes in the Bible you'll find that it speaks of a clear conscience. And one of the things to underscore is the point that the conscience is not infallible. Conscience is something that is developed and needs to be taught properly. And so it is that you look into a passage like 1 Corinthians 9, when the Apostle Paul is talking about food offered to idols. Some people felt guilty about eating that kind of food, and other people didn't have a problem with it. And that is an illustration where consciences are something that are developed. If a person is raised in a society, for instance, where copyright laws are ignored, when producing or buying pirated material, like before it would be VCR tapes, now it's CD tapes, computer software, or whatever. If you're raised in that kind of society where it doesn't really matter, then a person's conscience in regard to things like that, copyrighted materials, it doesn't trouble him to buy these things. It's and so that's an illustration where a conscience is conditioned or taught or developed. And one of the things that in 1 Timothy 4:2, Paul talks about a seared conscience. That's a conscience that is no longer sensitive to this sensibility of right and wrong. So consciences are not infallible. They have to be developed. They have to be conditioned. They have to be taught well. And parents are an important our important source, a place for children to grow up and learn to develop a good conscience. And Paul is saying here, he's saying, I thank God whom I serve with a clear conscience. He's got no sense of guilt. And as I said, he's condemned to die. He's been imprisoned. But Paul is no criminal. Okay, he is not condemned in the sight of God. He is a victim of Nero, Caesar Nero's accusations against Christians in AD 64. Some of you might remember that there was a great fire in Rome, destructive. Nero attempted to blame Christians for this destruction. And so it is that there was organized government persecution of the church. And Paul, as an apostle, is seized, and so he's sitting in a prison, being accused, an enemy of the state. But as he writes, he is saying to Timothy, yes, I'm sitting in prison, but my conscience is clear. I have done nothing wrong. In fact, he understands that he has been serving God, and he serves God as an act of worship. Notice in verse 3, when he says, I thank God whom I serve, the word that he uses there in verse 3, there are a couple of words that you can use in the Greek, and the one word that he uses here is a word that sometimes in other contexts is a reference to worshiping God or acts of worship in a worship service. And what Paul is saying, I think, when he uses this term, I serve God, he understands that his service, the things that he's done as a missionary, the things he's done as an apostle, he sees those things as part of his worship to God. And so he sits there, he's writing to Timothy, and he says, yes, even though I'm in prison, I serve with a clear conscience, with the whole perspective that what I have been doing in my service, in my worship of God. From that he pivots. Okay, because he thinks of Timothy, the person that he's writing. And he makes a reference to Timothy himself. And this is something that happens in the first chapter of Timothy. You know, he thinks of himself, he compares himself to Timothy, so he's bouncing back and forth to a certain extent. And so he makes a reference to Timothy's own faith. He says in verse 4, recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I have been reminded of your sincere faith, or as I said, your own genuine, authentic faith. He's saying that that the word that is used here is literally not hypocritical. In other words, this is somebody who is associated with God, who's been serving God, and his service to God is also a genuine faith, a genuine trust and a reliance on God. This is an authentic commitment. And most commentators, when they look at this verse, they see that, or they understand that this line here, talking about Timothy's genuine, authentic faith, that is the reason for why Paul gives thanks to Timothy. It's because his focus later is going to be, in the epistle, is going to be on other people, false teachers, people who go astray, people who leave the Lord. Timothy, on the other hand, he is saying, you, Timothy, your faith is the real thing. Your faith is genuine, it's authentic, it's not hypocritical. And this is where I think, as commentators have said, this is a point, I think, of emphasis. This whole matter of a faith that is genuine. Now, I want to veer off a little bit on this point for a moment. because he's talking about an individual. He's talking about, Paul's talking about Timothy, talking about his individual, this individual's faith. But individuals make up the church. And I want to veer off a little bit. In this age of COVID, in this age of lockdown, or we're pulling out of lockdown, the question I want to bring up, and I'll bring this back to this matter of genuine faith in a moment, but I want to ask this question: Can the church be the church on Zoom? Can the church continue to do what it's supposed to do? Supposed to do? Can it be what it's supposed to be while utter dependence on a Zoom type of platform? And I think that there are places where we know of where people of faith are under pressure. And with this Zoom technology is actually a useful thing. It's a helpful thing. Where the church is under pressure, perhaps being on Zoom or that type of electronic platform, that might be the only way that the church can actually continue to be the church. But some years ago, I ran across an article. It was it reported on a series of studies by a Stanford University doctoral student, Alex Jordan, and by now this person's probably graduated. But Alex Jordan at Stanford rounded up a number of college undergraduates, a demographic which came of age during the rise of Facebook, social media platform. And it evaluated the students' abilities it evaluated their abilities to judge the moods of one another. And as Jordan did his research, time and again, Jordan found that students underestimated how unhappy their peers were. Now, how does this come about? Well, one of the things I've noticed in the advent of Snapchat, smartphones, and that kind of thing, you go to a restaurant, you order something, the food comes, and what's the first thing you do? Okay, you take a picture of it, which is something that, we didn't do, 20 years ago, right? You take a picture so you can do what with it? You send it off to all your friends. Hey, see what I'm doing. See what I've got. You go on vacation. Hey, this is where we are. Boom. Take a couple pictures, send it off, connect to the internet, and send it off on your Snapchat, Instagram, or whatever platform you're using. And so it is that you're looking at your Facebook account or other people's Facebook accounts. And the sense is, you get this impression, gee, everybody else is having a terrific time out there somewhere. And I'm not. In fact, your life is maybe by comparison, especially when you're looking at all these accounts of your friends, you're thinking maybe you're not living it up as well as they are. And Jordan, in his studies, and I imagine that he published this, I came across this article, as I said, years ago, he found that students underestimated how unhappy their peers were. They're thinking their peers are very happy. And the more they underestimated others' sadness, the more they themselves became unhappy. They became depressed. Another writer, Libby Copeland, the writer who reported this, she wrote this. She said, if Jordan's conclusions are correct, it follows that the site would have a special power, that is, social media platforms like Facebook. It follows that the site would have a special power to make us sadder and lonelier. She went on to say, by showcasing the most witty, joyful, bullet-pointed version of our people's lives, and inviting constant comparisons in which we tend to see ourselves as losers, Facebook appears to exploit an Achilles heel of human nature. I came across another article that was published in U.S. News and World Report. This was far back in 2009. John Cacioppo, a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago, wrote a book entitled Loneliness, Human Nature and the Need for Social Connection. He made the point, if you use artificial means of connecting as a substitute for the physical means of connection, you actually get lonelier. So his point is that if you're primarily dependent on electronic means of connecting with people, you'll actually end up getting lonelier. In a series of questions, the interviewer asked Cacioppo and a number of questions, and one of the last questions they asked was this: people who go to church regularly live longer than non-church goers. Why is that? Now, that's not true for everybody, okay? But that was, I don't know where she got that statistic, but she asked that question. Why is that? Why is it that churchgoers tend to live longer? And Cacioppo answered, churches can be beneficial, can be very beneficial. One can feel connected to the group, the church, and to God. And those are actually different things, but both seem to have a beneficial effect. God is like a supercharged friend. Now, no Christian would say God's a supercharged friend. But this is Cacioppo. He's probably not a person of faith. But he's making this point, okay, that when you actually connect with real people in a community type of setting like your church, it's better for people. And what I'm trying to say is this whole matter of an authentic faith, a real faith, a genuine faith relationship with God, the internet actually works against authenticity. As great as the internet is, and I'm not suggesting that anybody gives up their internet life, okay, or their computers, but as great as the internet is, we all have also heard or come across people who develop what's called internet personas, okay, false personas. We come across, at worst, we read about some story of some predator who pretends he's somebody else in order to entice unsuspecting minors. That's the worst. But even then, dismissing those folks, there are people who pretend who they are not. And you can do that a lot more easily on the internet. Now, I know, and you know, that a person can be phony. A person can be phony in person, or they can be phony online. But my question is, in which kind of setting is it harder or easier to pretend to be phony, to pass yourself off as somebody that you're not? One of the things about the matter of developing an authentic faith, someone who you really are, someone who has a genuine relationship with God and with others, one of the things about a genuine faith is being who we really are, being honest about ourselves. And one of the things that comes across in the New Testament is this whole matter of the body of Christ, the church. It's this whole matter of how we need each other in a church. And we need community to develop, that is, interactions with real people. We need community to develop genuine faith relationships. And my question is this: can we have genuine community if it's only on Zoom? Okay? And even if the answer is maybe yes, I would have to say that it probably takes some effort. But it's still easier to keep a distance. It's still easier to fake it. Just thinking about this whole matter of the internet, the church on Zoom, and so forth, I remember a scene from the film Skyfall. Okay, that's not Skyfall. There is a scene. It's 007. He is meeting his new quartermaster, that is the one who supplies him with gadgets. He meets with him for the first time. And James Bond, he's somewhat appalled at the idea that, oh, you got some kid working this department. And Q says, Q thinks that, he's advanced with the times. And Q says to James Bond, I can probably do more damage sitting in my pajamas on my laptop before my first cup of Earl Grey than you can do in a year in the field. So James Bond hears that and says, oh, well, if that's so, why do you need me? And Q answers, well, sometimes a trigger has to be pulled. And James Bond turns and looks him in the eye and says, or not pulled. It's hard to tell when you're in your pajamas. And that made me think, for those of us who are developing an authentic faith, who are trying to develop a genuine faith relationship with God, can we really love God? Can we really love our neighbors while we're in our pajamas online? Can we really do that? Genuine faith is what Paul is talking about. And there are two components about genuine faith. I mean, we can say a lot of things, but at the very least, I would suggest that there are at least two components. One is trust. This whole matter of a reliance on God for our well-being. Another one is commitment. Commitment. This matter of committing ourselves to God, seeking to follow after Jesus. Dallas Willard, who passed away, he once gave this definition of a disciple. He said that a disciple is anyone whose ultimate goal is to live as Jesus would live if he were in their place. And that's a pretty good definition. Okay? In fact, many years ago, I heard a message from Pastor Tony Evans. He's a pastor in Texas. And one of the things in his sermons, one of his sermons was to illustrate this very point. This idea that we as believers, we have a responsibility to live out our faith as if Jesus were living in our place. And so Tony Evans said something like, if you are a secretary, your job is to show how Jesus would take dictation or take a letter. If you're a student, if you're a Christian student, your purpose for living is to show how Jesus would attend class and take exams. If you're a businessman, you are to show how Jesus negotiates a deal. If you're a nurse, your job is to show how Jesus would take blood pressure and insert IVs. That is, those are the practical implications of what it is to have a genuine faith, to live out our faith, to represent Jesus wherever we are. And there's another aspect of authentic, genuine faith, something that Paul talks about, and that's the next point that I want to make, and that is authentic faith has an honored heritage. This is something that Paul brings up, and as I said, this is only one sentence, but it comes up a couple of times. One of the things that he says in verse 3 says, I thank God whom I serve as my forefathers did. As my forefathers did. Paul's service, the way he puts it, the way he sees it that his ministry all these years is in line with what his faithful Jewish ancestors have been doing. Paul sees himself as a faithful Israelite. He sees that his work as a minister of Christ, as an apostle, that he's part of a long line of devout believers. Abraham, Joseph, Gideon, David, Hezekiah, Daniel, all these people. Paul sees himself as part of this long line of faithful believers in God. And from that, he again pivots. He turns from himself, and he looks at Timothy. And Timothy's faith is in accordance with his mother and his grandmother. That's his point when he says in verse 5, I've been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And I'm persuaded that this faith is also in you. Now, that's the shared characteristic that Paul and Timothy have. A shared faith. Now, I need to say this, that it's very unlikely that Timothy was brought up in a devout Jewish home. Okay? You look in Acts, and when Timothy comes up in the scene in Acts, we learn that his mother, who is Jewish, married a Greek. So Timothy was of mixed parentage, a Greek or Gentile father and a Jewish mother. But nevertheless, he has some type of spiritual heritage, even if it's not as deep or as extensive as Paul's. And that brings us, in all this whole idea of having an honored heritage. We believers today, in the 21st century, we can trace to a certain extent the kind of honored heritage that we have. We can trace our faith also through time. Today, we here in the 21st century in the States, in the United States, we face some sectors of society that looks at religious faith as irrelevant or useless. In fact, at worst, there are some people who, they see people of faith, Christians, as being intolerant or hypocritical. And, you read in the news, and every now and then we'll come across some scandal. Someone in the church who's been guilty of abuse, someone who departs the faith. We've had news accounts in recent years of prominent Christians who just made an announcement that they're leaving. They're leaving their church or leaving the faith. And so it is that you hear these accounts of people guilty of infidelities, people who deny the faith, and so it's no wonder that people who are not Christians, who are not people of faith, they're somewhat skeptical, if not just downright dismissive of those of us who have faith in Jesus Christ. But as I said, we do well to remember our spiritual heritage. Just to list or mention a few people. The picture on the right is a picture of Amy Carmichael, a missionary to India. She saved children from temple prostitution practices. And I have known of people who have worked in rescue ministries, people who are in ministries that, for instance, are trying to save women from sex trafficking. Before I was married, I was serving overseas. my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but back then, one of the things that she did from time to time on a Friday night was to work as a volunteer in a ministry in the city of Manila, doing this type of rescue work. And this type of, not far from where I live today, is a church. I know that they have part of their ministry is a rescue ministry where they go to different places in the East Bay, trying to get women out of the sex trafficking, that kind of activity. On the lower right, this is Paul Brand, who also served in India. He researched leprosy, which is a very disfiguring disease. And Paul Brand not only discovered the cause and the mechanism of leprosy, but he pioneered techniques on how to repair the damage that's done to nerves and to parts of the human body when it's afflicted by leprosy. The lower left is Florence Nightingale. When I was a kid, I learned about Florence Nightingale. Learned that it was her nursing school in London that began modern nursing traditions today. What I didn't know when I was a kid was that Florence Nightingale was a believer, a person of faith, who saw herself as being in the service of God. And later, as the Red Cross was established, the Red Cross as an organization has changed over the years. But when it first started, it was through the zeal of an evangelical Christian. And the modern missions movement continues to see Christian medical professionals who devote their lives to the needs of the suffering in different parts of the world. In the upper left on the screen is Seared Conscience. He was a pioneer pediatric surgeon. But Ronald Reagan invited Seared Conscience to become Surgeon General. And what Seared Conscience did was to elevate the post of the Surgeon General's office. And Seared Conscience was a man of faith. And we have him to thank for making the Surgeon General's office a force that it didn't have before he took on. I could talk about other organizations like the Salvation Army, Samaritan's Purse. These are all groups that organizations that are involved in disaster relief, and their motivation, of course, is because they are people of faith. They are motivated because of their love and dedication to God, and so it is. They do this type of ministry. I'm going to leave you with this quote. It was from a guy named Roy Hattersley, and he is a self-avowed atheist. Some time ago, he was quoted, or he wrote in a UK publication, the UK Guardian. He's an outspoken atheist, but Hattersley had an opportunity some years ago to see relief efforts after Hurricane Katrina slammed through the southeastern United States. And he saw the relief efforts that were taking place after Hurricane Katrina ran through. And the thing he said was this: notable by their absence were teams from rationalist societies, free thinkers, clubs, and atheist associations. The sort of people who scoff at religion's intellectual absurdity. He went on to say that, again, remember this is an atheist talking. He said, it's an unavoidable conclusion that Christians are the people most likely to take the risks and make the sacrifices involved in helping others. Again, that's an atheist talking about Christians who are motivated in doing this type of relief work. In a single sentence, the Apostle Paul, what he does is he hints at these themes, talking about a genuine faith, because they're going to be relevant in his epistle. And he's talking about a faith relationship with God, one that has integrity. Not just that it's ethical, doing the right things and being blameless, but a faith that is genuine and authentic, not shallow or superficial. He's making the point that we are part of a long, long line of other Christ followers over the centuries. And why does he raise these things? Because it is this kind of faith that's going to endure. An authentic faith, a genuine faith, that will endure. After the Great Fire in AD 64, the empire changed. Before, Christians were opposed by Jews, occasionally by Gentiles. You see this in the book of Acts. But as I said, when you come to the time of Nero, the fire, he blamed the Christians. And so you had government persecution which began. And so Paul's writing this letter. Our world, I want to suggest, has changed. Post-COVID, things have changed. It's not just that we are viewed less favorably by the society here in the U.S., but there are also stresses within the church. Will the church endure? Will the church be able to go on? Because I think the cracks show up when there are stresses. Will we endure? People and churches with an authentic faith, those people will endure. Somebody mentioned Coke, and I thought of that too. Some of you will remember that Coke has had many ad slogans over the years, but one notable one was the 1969 slogan, "Coke, it's the real thing." Various variations of this slogan has come up through the years, 1990, 2003, 2005. But this one seems to be one that Coke has decided, it's effective, and so they've used it. And that raises a question for us, the real thing. Your faith, is it the real thing? Because if your faith is the real thing, then we should cultivate it, strengthen it, and live it out. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for what Jesus has done for us and what he does within us. And our prayer, Father, is that you would continue to give us grace. May we lay a hold of our faith, live it out, and may you by grace strengthen us that we might bear the pressures and the stresses that we face. And so prove that we do have the real thing, and that you might be pleased with our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name.